Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're going to be taking a look at an aggro dragon build. This is almost identical to the one that won the rotation cup, although I have made just a slight adjustment. Instead of running triple Disdain, triple eyes, which I would normally recommend, I'm running double Serpent Drake in that place, as Serpent Drake is just a really high pressure card and does pretty well in nearly every matchup. Along with your Disdain combos, it's very hard to remove all of the Serpent Drake before it's going to at least get 1 or 2 procs, which is great. So I honestly really enjoy playing that card, which is why I've included it in this deck. So we're going to get right into the video and check it out. So first up we are against Haven. Always reasonably popular in both unlimited and rotation. Haven seems to be even more popular in the last probably couple of days to weekish period, as especially for unlimited it seems to be taking off hugely, but since we're playing rotation we should be set for a pretty standard kind of Haven deck. It should be reasonably predictable. So goblins of course are great in the aggro matchup against blood and shadow. They do really quite well and can really put a lot of pressure down, which is why they're included in almost every aggro deck. And when you have a Genesis of a Legend, having a 1-drop play is always a nice boost, especially when you've got the Bane effect, which is great. So forcing Unicorn Spear, fine. Considering how low cost that was, I don't really mind at all. Of course, little pop-ups always appear right when I don't want them to, but that's alright. So Serpent Drake, with the Evo, once attacked, is going to actually give us another one. So, as I mentioned at the start of the video, Serpent Drake does a great job at this. It puts a lot of pressure down and can make it very hard for the opponent to make a big comeback. Especially with an Evo on them, so definitely a warranted concede there. So with this deck, you typically want to look for super early cards, especially in the sword matchup, where you will struggle a little bit if sword gets a perfect curve. Otherwise, it's about 50-50 in my experience so far with the dragon aggro versus the sword. In particular mid-sword, but I have noticed mid-sword does tend to, of course, curve out more aggressively. So we start off with a fairly decent opener. I mean, Poseidon into Serpent Drake is a fairly good way to follow up turns. And we've also got our Disdain, which is going to work really well on 5 to really finish out the curve. So turn 4, probably just looking at playing a second Serpent Drake. No real reason not to. Oh, but we do end up with the Disdain Disciple, which actually can be comboed out on the same turn. So we're going to have even more Drakes now. It's going to be very hard to counter all of these in one go, especially for sword. So they're going to do their best, of course. It's really probably not going to be enough. At most, they clear 3 things here. Hitting the 3-1 definitely wasn't the way to go. Of course, it works out for them, but definitely not what you'd normally want to do. Usually you'd want to hit the highest health snake so that you can't end up proccing it again. So there's a nice damage burst, bringing them down to 8, right in range of our Aizdraha, but we've also got Omen of Disdain, so may as well take advantage of that too. So that's a little rough. Healing kind of puts them out of range of everything at this point. And now we just need to kind of get to turn 8. That's going to be kind of our big swing turn. So ramping up here is probably going to be our best option, clearing out a 1-2. Also, we've also used the destruction spell, getting rid of the big drop, and leaving ourselves just that 1 extra damage to go face with. Of course, Apostle of Usurping, that's a little bit of a problem card, but if we don't really need to worry about it, we should be fine. We should just be able to force damage to face and go for damage that way. So I do force the eyes. I probably should have went for Poseidon and done it that way, but I felt like forcing the eyes would give us a chance at going for lethal if we could get Disdain to go off once, which shouldn't be too difficult to do normally. All these pop-ups is because I just started up the computer again for the morning, so not a shock that we're getting those. So we go for the Poseidon. It's definitely more of a defensive line of play. Going to buy us a little bit of time. So now all we need to do is remove the 5-4, which Disdain will do perfectly, and we can close the game with the 5-7 Poseidon. It's going to work out pretty nicely.
I should have foreseen this.
Now for the final video of this, well, final match of this video, sorry, is going to be against Forest. Forest seems to have been rising up a little bit, especially after the Grand Prix, as Rotation Forest just seems to have got a new lease on life with more aggro-y type variants. Not a huge shock that we're seeing more Forest now, as people have been able to pick up some of the more better decks from top players for the Grand Prix, so definitely not a surprise. So I go for the early aggression, especially against Forest. Honestly, Forest is one of the better matchups for this deck, as 1-1 attack followers are very easy to get Disdain effects off on. So going face, we get our nice 1-3 Goblin with Bane. Even though I would have preferred it on the other follower, but would have worked out about the same either way. So we go for Pure Hearted Singer. Don't really have anything else to go for at this point, mainly just looking to draw something, as we're really just waiting to get to turn 5 where we can really start doing some damage with Disdain. So it looks like they are going to do the Pure Hearted Singer evolve, probably trade it off. It does still set up pretty nicely for Disdain, as we're going to wipe the board anyway. And since we had Bane on that, it really wasn't a big problem. I did decide to forego Disdain here, since we did get Serpent Drake, and using Disdain to clear this one follower probably wouldn't be worth it. Whereas building a board of Serpents is going to be pretty insane. So we have another 3-2 Serpent to come onto the board, and they're just going to pretty much pump fairies at this point, along with a Grasshopper Conductor. Definitely not a bad way to remove things, but it's going to be a little slow when we can just Serpent these out. So I decided to use my Serpent, of course. I want to get that proc. I want as many Serpents on board as I can get at this point. And of course, we go for Disdain for the extra little bit of damage. That kind of makes up for the Serpent not going face. And puts another body on board that pretty much has to be dealt with. So there's Cassiopeia. This one's the little unfortunate. If we had have got the proc to only hit the Disdain for the 3, I think it would have been, then we would have been fine. We would have actually got heaps of damage and been completely good. Unfortunately, they ended up with a decent clear because of the fact that it hit everything except for the Serpent as much as it needed. At least this was pretty decent setup. Being able to use Eyes will be pretty soul crushing. Even though Wrath of Nature is going to heal them for 3. Seems like 10 damage is kind of the sweet spot for most decks now. And at least we've got the start to our combo, so we've got Disdainful Rend, which is going to put Apostle very close to lethal. But we've also got Poseidon to at least buy us a turn. Even if we have to use Poseidon and Disdain just to kind of clear up a board. Which is looking to be the way I'll probably go with this turn. So a nice Poseidon. Gonna use Disdainful Rend to clean up the 3-3 to limit them clearing too many of these wards easily. And Greenland Axeman, another card that I'm really not that worried about. We're really just looking for a finisher at this point, as we don't need much to win this game. And that will be perfect. That will clear out the ward and we can go face for 5 damage. Nice way to go for our lethal. Seems like that's a really common combo for this deck and pretty easy to pull off. So this deck was a lot of fun to play, as most aggro dragons tend to be. It's reasonably cheap, not exceptionally cheap, just reasonably. We're still running quite a good amount of legendaries with 8, but still compared to some of the top end decks, that's a pretty comfortable number, and some of these legendaries can be used quite effectively in other builds of Dragon too, so you're not really losing too much with this deck. If you did enjoy this video, hit the like button and subscribe. We're going to have more videos like this going up in the next few days, so be sure to check those out. Until next time, see ya.